Hi everyone, and welcome back to another interesting story of a Texas bank robbery. I have titled this story, The Meanest One-Legged Bank Robber You Have Never Heard of. As I drive to a couple of small Texas towns, sit back and enjoy the Texas scenery, and I'll begin telling the details of this true story. This story actually begins in Oklahoma, but the story culminates in Grayford, Texas. As we can see on the map, Grayford is about 15 miles northwest of Mineral Wells. Grayford is a small country town in Palo Pinto, Texas, and has only about 600 people. No one really knew why Peg, as he was called, was so darn mean. Leonard C. Stockton was born in Barber, Oklahoma, July 27, 1900. His parents, Carter and Ruthie Stockton, were very poor and had very little to give Peg. The highest grade level that Peg completed was the 4th grade, which was not uncommon in the early 1900s. Peg's parents moved around many times through Oklahoma. Peg began getting into trouble at a very early age. By the time he was 12 years old, although Sheriff Nowlin of Latimer County thought he was 14, Peg spent time in the Paws Valley State School in November 1912. He continued to be in and out of juvenile schools. One lucky break came to Peg in January 1918 when he was sent to a Tulsa jail for horse thievery to await trial. The judge, Ed Warren, refused to hear any cases from the defendants that had been in the jail. At the time, a smallpox pandemic was occurring, and at the Tulsa jail, many prisoners had contracted the disease. The judge dismissed all trials, Peg's being one of them, but the horse's owner, T.E. Akers, was not happy with Peg getting off on these charges. By the time Peg was about 17 years old, he lived in Henrietta, Oklahoma. Peg got a job working at the U.S. Zinc Company in Sand Springs, which is a small community near Tulsa. There he performed smelter work at the plant and drove a truck for an oil company. Due to an accident, Peg lost the lower half of his right leg. Most of the time he wore a wooden peg in place of the missing limb. So people naturally started calling him Peg. Not that Peg was ever too keen on working, but now he couldn't or wouldn't hold a job for any length of time. However, Peg should have tried to find work because he was terrible at being a crook. He always got caught and was sent to jail. Even with his handicap, about 1925, Peg tried his skill at being a deputy sheriff in Hughes County, Oklahoma. One night, Peg was with several lawmen who participated in a liquor raid just east of Seminole, and there Peg arrested Harry Shepard for liquor violations. Due to his own drinking problem, however, Peg gave up being a lawman. On April 1st, 1927, Peg was at the Sunset Dance Hall on North Main Street in Seminole. Harry Shepard and one of his friends happened to be at the same bar. Harry wanted revenge for his arrest and started a fight with Peg. During the fight, Peg stabbed and killed Harry and seriously injured the friend. Peg was arrested for manslaughter and eventually sentenced to 15 years to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister. While Peg was in the state penitentiary, his sister's husband died and left her alone to raise their young daughter. Peg's sister, Allie Logan, petitioned the parole board and the governor of Oklahoma numerous times for Peg's early release. Allie's petition was so that Peg could help her raise her daughter in these hard times. Her petitions were written on any paper she could find and always in pencil. Finally, in April 1937, Peg was paroled due in part to Allie's help. Once released, though, Peg didn't go and help his sister as promised. Again, Allie wrote the state officials, but this time it was asking for assistance in finding her brother. Peg resumed his life of crime. 2 years after being paroled in Oklahoma, Peg went on a crime spree consisting of kidnapping, bank robbery, and murder. It started in Oklahoma City on Friday, April 7, 1939. Peg needed a ride out of Oklahoma City and chose to follow a young lady walking down the street. Opal Grace Luke was walking to her car after attending a church meeting when she noticed a strange-looking man following her. As Peg walked closer to her, Grace began to run. Grace saw a man getting into a car, so she ran to him crying for help. The man was Joe Ball, an off-duty Oklahoma City mailman. As both Grace and Joe got into his car, Peg jumped in the back seat, showing Ball a large knife. Peg told Joe to start driving out of town toward Chickasaw. Just south of Chickasaw, near Rush Springs, Joe started fighting with Peg. During the struggle, Grace ran from the car and hid in a nearby cotton field. Peg stabbed Joe several times and then dumped his body in the ditch. With a revolver, Peg then shot Joe once while lying in the ditch. Joe died in that roadside ditch before anyone found him. Peg took the car and drove away after not being able to find Grace. After Peg had driven away, Grace ran to a nearby farmhouse owned by Burt Coffey and called for help. From Rush Springs, Peg drove to Marlow, Oklahoma, a short distance away. By early Saturday morning the next day, Peg pulled the car into a service station for fuel. The service station attendant, James Sonny Ferguson, had just opened the station when Peg drove up. Upon filling the gas tank, Peg pulled his pistol on Sonny and told him to get in the car. The scared attendant did exactly as he was told. Then Peg drove across the Oklahoma border into Texas. In Perrin, Texas, Peg told Sonny to get out of the car. Thankfully, when Peg drove away, Sonny was still alive, but still frightened. In the video, I am now driving into Perrin, Texas from the north. This is the exact route that Peg drove. At the flashing yellow light is about where Peg released Sonny, the service station attendant. After being released, Sonny ran to a nearby house and asked for help. After leaving Perrin that Saturday morning, Peg drove straight to Grayford, Texas, and stopped in front of the First National Bank. It's unknown how Peg knew of this bank. Luck was on his side because the First National Bank of Grayford, Texas was financially well off. I am now driving into Grayford, Texas, again following the exact route that Peg drove to the bank. He would park very close to the front doors. The bank is the corner building on the far left. Peg would walk up to these front doors of the First National Bank of Grayford, Texas, with his revolver in his hand. Peg walked up to this exact teller cage and demanded all of the bank's money. The teller, Miss Alta Mae Davini, walked into the vault and filled a bank bag with some money and gave it to Peg. At the time unknown to Peg, the bank bag contained only $850, far from the entire contents of the vault. Miss Davini saved the bank's money that day. This is the bank's teller, Miss Alta Mae Davini. And this is a photograph of the bank's vault that is still there to this day. Soon, all lawmen in the area was looking for Peg. Just north of Breckenridge, Palo Pinto County Sheriff John Edmondson and his deputy, Faybert Holmes, were in a running gun battle with the bank robber. When Peg's tires were shot out by the sheriff, Peg's car crashed in a ditch. Peg continued to shoot it out with the lawman until a bullet grazed his head. Peg surrendered. These two photographs show the approximate location of where Peg was captured after a shootout with lawmen. This is a photograph of Peg under arrest and a photograph of Peg with his head bandaged from the gunshot wound. This is James Sonny Ferguson, the service station attendant that Peg kidnapped. Here he is very happy that Peg is now under arrest and he is safe. On July 11th, 1939, Peg was tried and convicted on the kidnapping and bank robbery in Texas. Peg received 15 years. But this isn't the end of the story of this mean man. After 5 years in the Texas Penitentiary in Huntsville, Peg decided that he'd had enough. On June 20th, 1944, Peg and 3 other inmates escaped from the prison farm near Huntsville. Peg smuggled a knife from the kitchen and threatened a guard. Peg took a key to the prison arsenal from the guard, and each of the 4 prisoners took a pistol. Peg and his gang took over the main building to the prison. While making his way out of the building, Peg encountered prison guard George T. Preston. Peg shot George once, killing him. Peg and the others escaped in the warden's car. On June 22nd, Peg had a gun battle with deputies near Orange, Texas. He surrendered after being wounded in the battle. He was tried and convicted of the death of George Preston. He received the death penalty. Prison guard George Preston had a wife, Jessie, a daughter, Ann, and a son, George Jr. This is a drawing of prison guard George Preston, who was killed by Peg. As you may guess, Peg cheated the executioner. On December 12, 1948, Peg had a massive heart attack and died at the prison hospital. The prison doctor M.D. Hansen pronounced Peg dead at 10:50 p.m. Dr. Hansen was the same doctor that tried to revive prison guard George Preston after being shot by Peg. No one came forward to claim Peg's body. Leonard C. Peg Stockton was buried in the prison cemetery without a tombstone. I hope that you've enjoyed this story, and thank you for coming along with me on this trip. Thank you so much for watching.